Alright, we are live, ladies and germs, and we just saw one of the craziest F1 races that I've seen in recent memory. Of course, I'm talking about the 2021 Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku, on the Baku street circuit. And this was one of them holy shit, what the fuck moments. There was a couple of them in this race, and good lord, there is so much to talk about. One thing's for sure, it's definitely a hell of a lot better than what we saw at Monaco a couple weeks ago. So strap yourselves in, we got a lot to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Fuel. What's happening, ladies and germs, and welcome to this morning's edition of The Fuel, first of two here today. Of course, I'm going to be talking about the Formula One Azerbaijan Grand Prix on the Baku street circuit. It's a 51 lap affair, and I was progressing along as per the usual, as we see in Formula One Grand Prix, but then near the end it really took a turn, to say the least. And this is our 92nd edition of The Fuel. One second. I've watched a lot of Formula One races. It's been a while since we've seen one go in the direction that this one went at the end of this race, because this was, without a doubt, one of the craziest Formula One races I've seen in recent memory. So many twists and turns to this one, so many storylines coming out of this. It's unreal. And after the total bore fest that was Monaco, this really spiced things up as far as the Formula One world is concerned. But it's definitely left a lot of questions in terms of the tire manufacturer bringing some hard tires that maybe were not up to the standard that they usually have, which resulted in some crazy shenanigans at the end of this race, such as Sergio Perez getting his second career Formula One victory. Cat, will you please stop that? Fucking cat was scratching the wall. Like, what are you doing? Like, good lord. Friggin' animal. You want to talk to the microphone? Don't rub your face against it. Shithead. But anyway, but yeah, Sergio Perez getting his second career Formula One victory. Of course, he got his first one last year when he was driving for what was then known as Racing Point, and is now a part of Red Bull as teammate to Max Verstappen. And all season long, for the most part, as little shitty has come up onto the desk now. But all season long, Sergio Perez was kind of looked at as maybe not on the same level as Verstappen, at least in the first 5 races of the year. It seemed like he was a tad bit off the pace. But today in this race, in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it was pretty evident that Perez was starting to find his footing at Red Bull, because even though he was not as quick as Verstappen in this race, he was definitely not that far off, and he was able to be a good foil for his teammate, especially to Lewis Hamilton, who was basically trailing him for much of this race, which we're going to be getting into all that here in a bit. But yeah, this is definitely one of the craziest podiums I've seen in recent memory as well. So, and also on that note, Sebastian Vettel, driving for the new Aston Martin team, gets the team's first podium ever. And it was his first podium in quite some time too. Last time he was on the podium, I think, was middle of last year. So it's been a while since he's been on the podium. And a lot of people thought, you know, this move to Aston Martin, you know, after being with Red Bull and then Ferrari, the move to Aston Martin was kind of seen as a downgrade in Vettel's career, especially considering, you know, he is a 4-time world champion. But I tell you what, the last couple of races, he's done that Aston Martin proud. He finished in the top 5 at Monaco, I believe. I believe he finished 5th, if memory serves me correctly. And then in this one, he manages a runner-up finish. And it looked like he was going to be a threat for the podium anyway, because he had fresh hards compared to the 3 in front of him. So he looked like he was going to be a threat for the podium anyways. And then it was basically handed to him on a silver platter, with the 2 championship contenders finding trouble in this race, which we're going to be getting into. Because the big story that's going to come out of this Azerbaijan Grand Prix is Pirelli tire failures, which leads to what the title of this review is: WTF Pirelli. Now, motorsports in general, not just talking about Formula One, but motorsports in general, all over the world, has certainly seen its fair share of tire controversies. Of course, NASCAR has had them in the past with Firestone and then Goodyear, of course. And of course, you had the tire war between those two for many decades. Then, of course, you had the tire war between Goodyear and Hoosier, which was a pretty bloody affair, to say the least. And of course, Goodyear's had their fair share of issues over the years. I mean, remember Indianapolis 2008? You know, the disaster that was, or the 2005 Coca-Cola 600. Remember that one? Yeah. So Goodyear has certainly seen their fair share of tire disasters in NASCAR. Of course, dates all the way back to the 1950 Southern 500, you know, when the tires that a lot of the drivers had been using just wouldn't hold up on asphalt. So they basically had to raid tires from cars in the parking lot just to get to the end of that race. And Formula One has certainly seen its share of tire issues and tire controversies as well. Because back in the late 90s, early 2000s, they had their own little tire war between Bridgestone and Michelin. And we all remember the 2005 United States Grand Prix at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway after, of course, Indianapolis had the surface repaved. And Michelin was suffering tire blowouts in the last turn, which is, of course, Indianapolis Turn 1, which is a banked turn, which is something that, at the time, Formula One was not really used to driving on. And there was a major tire controversy that came out of that as well, because all the Michelin runners had basically pulled off and did not race in that event, which was a pretty big disaster, because it basically led to the United States Grand Prix being taken off the schedule after the 2007 season, and it would not return for 5 years, and it would be at a completely new venue, which was purpose-built for Formula One, the Circuit of the Americas, which is where the U.S. Grand Prix has resided ever since. But then Pirelli took over as the main tire supplier for Formula One, and for the most part, their tires have been pretty damn good. I mean, we haven't seen anything in the way of any tire controversies or blowouts or anything of that nature since Pirelli became the main tire supplier for Formula One. But that was certainly not the case today, because Pirelli's hard compound tire suffered not one, but 2 blowouts in the race today. The first one was the Aston Martin. It was one of the Aston Martins. It was Lance Stroll. I was trying to think of his name right off the top of my head. Lance Stroll, who had started on the hard compound tires and was trying to run until he had to pit for fresh rubber, or he was going to try to get a safety car, and then he ended up being the safety car. Now you might be saying, well, it's his fault for running that long on hard tires, you know what I mean? Here's the thing though. Pirelli gives these teams a number to go by where, yeah, the tires can last up to this point. Now the number that they gave these F1 teams for the hard compound tires was 41 laps. And this was a 51 lap race. Now the rules state that if it's a dry condition race, you have to race on at least two sets of tires. The one that you start on, and then you have to pit once again for a different set. So you have to make at least one pit stop in a dry weather race. Changes up a little bit if there's wet conditions involved. But in a dry weather race, you have to make at least one pit stop to change on to a different set of tires. So Stroll was not going to be on those same tires forever, but he was hoping for a safety car, obviously. But he probably wouldn't have pitted until, I would say, about lap 35 to 40, because that was like right on the edge of what Pirelli said the tires were supposed to go to. And then he loses the left rear tire on the front stretch and has a hard crash into the barrier. Now, at first, you would speculate, with something like this, well, was it a puncture? Did he happen to run over a piece of debris and cut the tire down? Because there are two ways that a tire can blow out, basically. It's either a failure in the construction of the tire, or it suffered some kind of cut or puncture due to a piece of debris on the racetrack. Those are the two main ways that a tire can basically fail. And at first, a lot of us were thinking, including officials, were like, well, maybe it was a puncture. Maybe there was a piece of debris that he ran over on the racetrack. But that didn't feel like the case with the next blowout. And that was with Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen was leading this race handily, and he was going to win this race without any question. I think he had like about a 6-second lead on his teammate when coming down the front stretch, basically the same spot where Lance Stroll had his failure. Just cruising along down the front stretch, and all of a sudden the left rear tire blew out, and he spun and he crashed. And it was the same tire. It was the left rear tire that went on the Red Bull. And the Red Bull team even said to race control, because they actually had the broadcast can actually tune into like the radio conversations, especially between the teams and race control. Red Bull basically said that there was no warning whatsoever, because they have telemetry and stuff on the cars that allows them to track this shit. And if a tire starts to lose air pressure, they can sense it in the data in their instruments, and they can relay that to the driver, say, hey, we think we might have a tire going down, or something of that nature. There was no warning whatsoever on that left rear tire going down on that Red Bull. Which leads me to, and here's the other thing. 2 left rear tires on 2 different race teams in the same race. That doesn't sound like running over a piece of debris to me. That doesn't sound like a puncture or a cut tire. That sounds like a tire failure in terms of the construction of the tire. Now, they did say that the harder compound is a little bit softer for this race than they had in past races. Well, Pirelli may have screwed the pooch on that one, because to have 2 left rear tire failures on 2 completely different teams in the same spot on the racetrack, by the way, on the front stretch, the fastest part of the racetrack, because that is a long front stretch. I think they said that about 1.5 miles of the entire race course is that front stretch. And you can easily get up to almost 200 miles an hour by the time they get to the end of that front stretch. And to have a tire failure there, especially, and bear in mind, this is a street circuit. This is on the streets of Baku in Azerbaijan. And the barriers that they have set up are not softer barriers. They're not the safer barriers like we see in NASCAR. Those are solid concrete barriers. The last thing you want in a Formula One car going 200 miles an hour is a tire failure. That's a very scary aspect. And when Lance Stroll had his failure and he hit the wall hard, there was some concerns that, you know, he might have suffered some type of injury or anything like that, because, I mean, that's a solid concrete barrier. And going from 200 miles an hour to basically nothing in the blink of an eye when you have a tire failure is a very scary thing to have happen to you. And yes, these cars have been made safer and safer, especially thanks to the halo that the F1 cars have. But yeah, that's not exactly a safe condition to have these drivers in. So Pirelli is going to have a lot of explaining to do in terms of their left rear tires going down, in particular their hard compound tires, because when you tell these teams that these tires can last to a certain point and then the tires don't even come close to getting to that certain point, yeah, you got some explaining to do, Pirelli, because this is going to tarnish Pirelli's reputation as far as a tire manufacturer is concerned, because, I mean, up to this point they've had really no issues whatsoever, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue in this race, boom, 2 tire failures. Same tire, left rear tire, on 2 completely different teams. Yeah. This was no debris. This was no debris that both of these cars ran over. And this could have had very serious implications in the championship if it were not for the fact that Lewis Hamilton completely beefed it on the final restart. I mean, he had an opportunity to take full advantage of Verstappen's misfortune. And here's the thing. Verstappen did absolutely nothing wrong. He had done everything right, and he was going to win this race handily, were it not for this tire failure. And with Hamilton in second on the final restart, which was going to be a standing start, I mean, the championship was going to swing the other direction. It was going to swing back Hamilton's way, and then he completely blew the restart, blew turn 1, and completely finished out of the points. A massive mistake by Hamilton, rarely ever seen, and his string of 54 consecutive points finishes, which is over 2.5 seasons of racing, down the drain just from that one mistake. And apparently the mistake was he forgot to, because these cars have what are called magic brakes, I think he said, where you lock it in and the heat from the brakes blows onto the tires to get them up to temperature, and he forgot to turn those brakes off for the restart. And apparently that caused him to lock the tires up and slid off in turn 1. Now, admittedly, he did have a not so good angle going into the turn, because he was side by side with Perez going into the turn. He didn't exactly have a good angle, but I mean, if he would have hit that turn correctly, he probably would have been ahead of Perez, and he would have had a shot to win this race, and then the championship would have just been turned completely upside down, because that would have been a massive point swing, you know, with Verstappen going out losing potentially 26 points, because he did end up with the fastest lap. And then, you know, if Hamilton would have snookered this victory from Red Bull, that would have been a massive, probably 52 point swing. That is a massive swing in Formula One. and until Hamilton beefed it. And then we ended up with the crazy podium that we had in this race, with Perez taking the win, Sebastian Vettel coming up with his first podium for Aston Martin, and Pierre Gasly, who ran a solid race all day, was pretty much top 5, I think, all race long. He ends up on the third and final spot on the podium. So this shifts the Constructors' Championship completely Red Bull's way. They gained 25 points out of the deal because both of the Mercedes cars did not score points. Bottas was completely garbage in this race. He was nowhere to be found in this race. He had a bad qualifying effort, and that race just didn't get any better for him whatsoever. I would say Bottas' time at Mercedes may be coming to a close after this season. And it'll be interesting to see who might be in line for that Mercedes seat if that is indeed the case. Because while Monaco was not his fault, despite what his boss might say, you know, a tire hub or a tire screw, or my brain is not working right now. Shit. Lug nut. That's what I was thinking of. I had to wake up early to watch this race. It started at 8 a.m. Eastern Central Time here in the States, so I had to wake up kind of early to be able to watch this race. So my brain's still trying to kind of wake up a little bit. But you can't really blame, despite what his boss might say, you can't really blame Bottas for what happened in Monaco, because a lug nut was cross-threaded on the right front, and they just could not get it off to save their life. So how can you blame that on Bottas? In this case, he just sucked. You know, and this was a track that I think he won at previously too. So it's like, holy shit, Bottas is just garbage in this race. You know? But the Red Bulls definitely look good, and this is going to be a war between Red Bull and Mercedes. Mercedes getting their first real battle in quite some time for the Constructors' Championship and for the Drivers' Championship. Constructors have definitely swung their way, but they better be thanking their lucky stars that Hamilton beefed the first turn on that restart at the end of the race. Otherwise, the Drivers' Championship would have swung back the way of Hamilton. But as it stands, they don't gain, they don't lose. The championship between Verstappen and Hamilton remains the same at 105 for Verstappen and 101 for Hamilton. Now Perez, with his win, moves up to third in the championship, but he's still quite a ways back. I mean, let's be honest here. The championship battle is between Verstappen and Hamilton. There's no question about that. It's just who's going to get that third spot in the Drivers' Championship. And right now, at this point, you got to give it to Sergio Perez. I mean, he had been a little bit lacking in the first 5 races of this season, but he finally arrives in round number 6 of what is now 22 races at this point. Because there was a Grand Prix that had to be canceled. Due to COVID-19 concerns, and that is the Singapore Grand Prix at the Marina Bay circuit, which is a street circuit. It was one of the few night races that Formula One had, but due to COVID concerns, the Singapore Grand Prix has been canceled for 2021. So this brings the number of Grand Prix down to 22, although they have been talking about replacing Singapore with another Grand Prix. There are rumors suggesting that there may be a second Formula One Grand Prix in the United States to replace the Singapore Grand Prix. Now, obviously, they're going back to Circuit of the Americas for the United States Grand Prix after it was canceled due to COVID last year. But it will be interesting to see where this potential second U.S. Grand Prix could be, if that is indeed the case. But nothing has been confirmed, and I would take it with a grain of salt, at least for right now. Now, there will be 2 U.S. Grand Prix next year, because Miami has been confirmed. Of course, they've been, promoting it and all that other jazz. But it will be on the streets of Miami in 2021. So that'll be pretty interesting, to say the least. And it will be a street circuit. It'll be it's going to be around an arena. Miami GP. Miami Grand Prix to join the F1 calendar in 2022. It's going to be racing around the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida, and it's going to be a 3.36 mile street circuit. And I'm going to activate display capture for a second here. That is what the circuit looks like. It is a 19-turn circuit. Wow, and I see a lot of potential passing opportunities from this circuit. Coming out of 17, and then you go through 18 and 19. I could see a passing opportunity going into turn 1, perhaps into turn 4. I mean, it also really depends on where they have the DRS zones. I'm guessing that's where the red arrows indicate. I think those might be DRS zones. I'm not entirely sure on that. Don't quote me on that. But there's definitely 2 major passing zones that this circuit presents. Coming off of 8, going down to 9. I'm guessing you could be pretty much wide open through here. And passing zone down into turn 11. Bit of chicanery through here. And then off of turn 16 down this long-ass backstretch. All the way to turn 17 through 18 and into 19 and back to the start-finish line. So this has the potential to be a very racy Grand Prix next year for the 2022 Miami Grand Prix. The 2 major passing zones I'm seeing is off of 8 down to 11 and from 16 to 17. So lots of passing opportunities present itself with this circuit. So pretty interesting to say the least, and it'll be raced around the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida. And apparently it has a 10-year contract. Holy crap. That is a big contract. So that's something to look forward to next year. But yeah, Singapore Grand Prix canceled. They are talking about maybe replacing it with another Grand Prix. Rumors are it is going to be in the States. We don't know exactly where. I mean, the safest bet would probably be Indianapolis, if that's truly the case. Or maybe even a return to Watkins Glen. I mean, if there is going to be a second Grand Prix in the States to replace Singapore, they got plenty of choices to choose from to host this second Grand Prix in the United States, if they want to go that route. But we'll have to wait and see. But in between Monaco and this race, there was some sad news that kind of came out about one of the big head honchos of Formula One, Max Mosley, who has been an integral part of Formula One, passed away. I think it was May the 24th, if memory serves me correctly. Double check things here. No, it was May the 23rd. He actually used to be a race car driver, a lawyer, and was the president of the FIA. And he passed away on May the 23rd, 2021 at the age of 81. Of course, he was also part of the FOCA FISA war that happened in the late 70s, early 80s, and he was a part of FOCA. So he was actually the legal advisor for FOCA, and then he became the elected president of FISA in 91, and then became president of the FIA in 1993. And then he stepped down in 2009 at the end of his term. So I think he helped lead Formula One to what it is today. And thoughts and prayers are with the Mosley family right now, as they're certainly going through a tough time with his passing. Certainly a huge blow for Formula One as well. But that's all the headlines coming into and during and after this race. Man, we're a half hour into this review, and we haven't even gotten to the race yet, which was the most competitive race of the year so far, and definitely the most interesting. This is a race that's definitely going to be talked about for a while. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the 2021 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I don't think this race was held last year due to COVID, so it returns this year. Definitely one of the fastest street circuits on the schedule, and one of the longer ones as well. 51 laps this race had. So for the second race in a row, Charles Leclerc started from the pole. This time he actually got to start from the pole, unlike his home Grand Prix in Monaco. Good clean start. It was actually a very good clean start for this one. Perez had a good start. I mean, he started 6th. Let's also point this out here. Sergio Perez started 6th in this Grand Prix, and he ends up in victory lane. That's pretty damn good. So Leclerc leads lap 1, but Hamilton and Verstappen are right on his heels. Williams decides to come in and pit George Russell. And switches to the hard compound tire because, of course, obviously, they were told that the tires could last potentially to the end of the race. Of course, 50 laps on hards is a bit of a stretch, especially when you consider what happened during this race with the left rears. But they were going to try it. Might as well. I mean, their program needed something, to try to get back going again, because they are long past their glory days, I'll tell you that much, and they need something to help revitalize that race team. Something needs to happen. So, bear in mind, DRS was not enabled yet. It usually isn't enabled until lap 3. But Hamilton is able to use the draft down the front stretch, and he slingshots past Leclerc for our first and only Pirelli change of the day on lap 2. But this was still the most competitive race of the year so far, and we'll get to that in a little bit. It looked like Verstappen cut a corner in Sector 2, but it looked like it was to possibly avoid some debris. It looked like a branch had fallen on the track, so I think he was just taking evasive action right there. I'm pretty sure race control was kind of on the horn, saying, asking why he might have cut the corner. It's like, well, there might have been some debris on the track, and it looked like there was a branch on the track. Doesn't matter what kind of tires you have. You don't want to be running over anything with these racing tires. Asinu, bring back Bridgestone tires. I mean, to be fair, the Bridgestones were pretty good. I mean, even though when the Bridgestone Michelin war was happening, there was only like 3 teams that were using Bridgestones. Ferrari was one of them. I mean, Bridgestone and Ferrari were like hand in hand. Pretty much the rest of the teams were running Michelins. But, I mean, Pirelli, let's be honest here. Pirelli, I mean, their track record has been pretty good. I mean, is this going to be a bit of a smudge on their record? Yeah. But, I mean, to be fair, Pirelli's tires have been pretty damn good. I mean, how often have we really seen tire failures, like, from subpar construction? There hasn't really been that many instances, I don't think, as far as I can remember, of Pirelli having issues like we saw today. So, I mean, Bridgestones were good, but I mean, Pirelli, for the most part, has been pretty stellar with their tire construction. It's just that wasn't really the case here today, and it could have potentially affected the Drivers' Championship in a big way. But anywho, where was I? Verstappen cut a corner possibly to avoid debris, like I said. Esteban Ocon didn't really get much of a chance to run in this race. Retires at the end of the second lap after gearbox failure. I think he hit the wall in qualifying. It was either qualifying or practice, and that might have damaged the gearbox. Kind of a similar instance to what happened to Charles Leclerc at Monaco. And the team opted not to change the gearbox, and that would end up being a mistake. Hamilton and Verstappen start trading the fastest lap early on, which is to be expected. The top three at this point were 1.5 seconds of each other 5 laps into the race. So I was like, man, this is pretty interesting. Leclerc was still in second at this point. So Verstappen uses DRS to pass Leclerc after Leclerc kind of falls out of DRS range of Hamilton. Verstappen uses that to his advantage and uses the DRS to pass Leclerc for second. So Red Bull versus Mercedes is on once again. And it's going to be that way for, I think, the majority of the season, if not all season. Yuki Tsunoda gets by Alonso for 7th. Tsunoda did himself proud today in the AlphaTauri car. Perez by Leclerc for 3rd from his 6th starting spot. So he's already up 3 positions. Norris and Alonso pit for tires on lap 8. They switch to the hards. Leclerc pits on lap 10 for hard tires, as well as Tsunoda. So lots of different varying strategies going on at this point. Carlos Sainz pits on lap 11, but on the fresh hards, slides it off into the runoff in turn 8, which is an ouchie because he was running inside the points. And this is where things took a turn and went Red Bull's way. Hamilton pits from the lead for hard tires, but has to wait in his pit stall because he has to wait for Pierre Gasly, who pitted with him, to come by. If Mercedes would have released him at that point, right in front of Pierre Gasly, that would have been deemed an unsafe release, which would have resulted in a penalty for Hamilton. So that was just bad luck that Gasly decided to pit at the same time as Hamilton, and that would cost him the lead. Verstappen would pit on lap 13 for hard tires. His pit crew has another lightning stop under 2 seconds, 1.9 second pit stop, and that puts him ahead of Hamilton. Sergio Perez pits from the lead on lap 14, but has a bit of a slower stop. The Red Bull guys stumble a little bit, but he was still fast enough. The pit crew was still fast enough to get him ahead of Hamilton. So Red Bull is in a very good spot now because Verstappen can, set sail, and Perez can kind of be like the shield in between himself, in between Verstappen and Hamilton. So everything looking to go Red Bull's way in this race. Perez starts setting fastest laps now, as well as Verstappen and Hamilton, so they started kind of trading the fastest lap back and forth. Vettel, who stayed out longest time, he was on soft tires, finally comes in on lap 19 and has the freshest hards, which would be a big benefit to him later on down in this race. And at this point, Bottas was struggling down in 10th, and at this point it's kind of like, I would say his time at Mercedes may be dwindling if things don't turn around. Nikita Mazepin has to go down the access road in turn 4 because he just fucking sucks. I mean, Haas F1 in general just sucks right now. I honestly think Haas should pull out of F1 because, it's pretty obvious that the F1 team is no good, and I think it's honestly hurting the performance of his NASCAR team because pouring so much resources into F1, I think, is having a cascade effect, and it's affecting his NASCAR program, which is probably why we're seeing only Harvick basically carrying the Cup side of things while the other 3 cars are struggling quite a bit. Battle for 5th is heating up between Gasly, Leclerc, and Vettel, and this was when we got our first of 2 safety cars, of course, for the left rear tire failures. This was when Lance Stroll lost his left rear tire, crashes hard on the front stretch. It was a hard hit, but thankfully he was okay. took a ambulance car, medical car, back to his pit stall. And of course that was on lap number 31. Mazepin gets a wave around. Several drivers come in for fresh tires. Mick Schumacher nearly went back out on the track. He stopped and got softs, but nearly went back on the track with a wobbly left front, a loose wheel. So they had to stop and back him up and tighten the lug nut on that tire, because that could have been really bad. So Verstappen leads on the restart on lap 36. Vettel gets by Leclerc for 5th and then by Gasly for 4th. And at one point he was lapping quicker than Lewis Hamilton. So at this point it was kind of like, he might be a threat for the podium at this point. So DRS is re-enabled on lap 39. Hamilton sets the fastest lap one lap before, but then Verstappen regains it the next lap. From this point forward, Sergio Perez was doing a great job keeping Hamilton behind him. And it's looking like a Red Bull 1-2 at this point. But then came the big moment of the race, and it made us all go, what the fuck just happened? Safety car number 2 on lap 47, and it was the race leader, Max Verstappen, crashing on the front stretch after losing his left rear tire, similar to what happened to Lance Stroll earlier. As now it's saying YouTube is not receiving enough video. Oh, shut up. Yeah, I'm looking at OBS. So I'm seeing. Okay, it's look. I'm always afraid when that comes up, because I'm always afraid that OBS stopped working for a second and cut off part of the review. That's happened a few times this year. But yeah, this was one of those holy shit moments, and it said that there was a crash on the front stretch, and as soon as they said Verstappen, I literally went like this. Oh my god. That was literally my reaction. That was one of the most shocking things I've seen in Formula One in quite some time. And this could have swung the championship. I mean, this could have been the championship decider. I mean, I know we're only 6 races in, but good lord, as close as this battle has been between Red Bull and Mercedes, any little hiccup could be devastating in the championship. As close as these two teams have been so far in 2021. It's the closest that any team has been to Mercedes in years. I mean, Mercedes has had a stranglehold on Formula One for the last 7 years. And now Red Bull has finally stepped up their game and has basically pulled even, and in fact has pulled ahead of Mercedes at this point. And this could have potentially crippled Red Bull's hopes. Maybe not for the Constructors' Championship, but this could have swung things back Hamilton's way in terms of the Drivers' Championship. And quite frankly, it should have swung things Hamilton's way. And it was of no fault of Verstappen's. It was just ineptitude on Pirelli's part in this case, making a tire, a hard compound tire, that was clearly not up to snuff. So there was a lot of talk then after this safety car came out. There was a lot of talk, amongst the officials and stuff, and it's like, well, could this race end behind the safety car? Could this race effectively end under caution, as we say in NASCAR terms? But that's not what happened. That is not what happened. Instead, they opt to throw the red flag and bring the cars down pit road on lap 49 to clean up the debris and the remains of Verstappen's Red Bull. Which means we were going to have a green-white checkered in Formula One. How often do we see that? Not very. At this point, I was like, yeah, Pirelli is going to have some splaining to do after this race. And this, of course, was inconsequential, but they handed a 10-second penalty to Nicholas Latifi for failing to go down pit lane under the safety car. Basically, they were leading everyone down the pit lane because, of course, you had safety vehicles out there trying to clean up the mess. And for some reason, Williams told the Williams crew, basically the crew chief, or the strategist as called in Formula One, they basically told him to stay out, stay out, stay out, and Latifi took that as staying out on the racetrack when he wasn't supposed to. So that ended up with a 10-second penalty for him, which didn't really matter. I mean, he wasn't in the points anyway. So, and then they decided it will be a standing start, similar to what we saw at the beginning of the race. So a standing start, 2-lap green-white checkered finish. A green-white checkered in Formula One. Who would have thought? So the lights go out. Hamilton actually got a good start, and it was side by side with Perez going into the first turn. I'm thinking, oh my God, could he steal this win? And then it happens. He locks the tires up. He didn't have a very good angle going into turn one anyways, but he locks the tires up and slides off into the runoff area and completely out of the points. And at this point, I'm just thinking, what the fuck is going on? This race has just completely turned on its head at this point. The championship is just going, it's like a pendulum. It's just going back and forth and back and forth. We don't know where the fuck it's going to land. In a lot of ways, that's a very appealing thing, because in years past, the last 7 years pretty much, it's been Mercedes wins law. Now we don't know what the fuck is going to happen, especially after this race. And then we have a great battle for the final podium spot between Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly. I mean, Leclerc had fallen back quite a bit and was back into the 6th position at this point for a majority of the race. But then with Verstappen and Hamilton having their problems, he's suddenly in a fight with Pierre Gasly for the final spot on the podium. And then you have Lando Norris and the McLaren right behind them. At this point, Perez managed to get out ahead and easily got away from Vettel. But the fight was for that final podium spot between Leclerc, Gasly, and Norris. But Gasly is able to keep the Ferrari at bay. And Sergio Perez, in his 6th race with Red Bull, wins the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, his 2nd career Formula One victory. And then Sebastian Vettel and Pierre Gasly round out the podium. Sebastian Vettel gets Aston Martin their first podium ever, and Pierre Gasly gets on the podium for AlphaTauri. And then on top of that, Perez's car breaks down literally in the first turn after the checkered flag. Red Bull better be thanking their lucky stars on this one. I can tell you that much. They better be thanking their lucky stars, because this could have ended very badly for Red Bull, and it could have very negatively affected them, not only in the Constructors' Championship, but for sure in the Drivers' Championship. So they should consider themselves extremely lucky. Unreal how this race turned out. Just an absolutely crazy, spellbinding race. You know, after the race we started after that after that first safety car, things kind of settled down and it started getting back in the groove, and it looked like it was just going to run out to the finish with Max Verstappen scoring his 13th F1 victory. And then all hell breaks loose with the left rear tire going flat on Verstappen's car, and thinking, man, Pirelli, what the hell happened here today? Nothing good, I'll tell you that much. But what a crazy Grand Prix this was. Absolutely unbelievable. Spellbinding, though, to say the least, which when you look back at what we saw at Monaco, night and day difference. Because Monaco was garbage. And this one was just, holy shit. Yeah, this was probably, despite, you know, the tire issues with Pirelli, I think this was, without a doubt, the best Grand Prix of the season thus far. Unreal. Absolutely unbelievable. So, let's do some statistics. There were 6 overall lead changes in this race, which is the most of the season so far. Only 1 pure lead change, but you know, you don't really expect a whole hell of a lot in Formula One racing. And we had 2 safety cars, which were for obvious reasons. Alright, so let's take a look at the race results. Your top 10 finishers. From the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Sergio Perez with the victory, his 2nd career win. Sebastian Vettel and the Aston Martin comes home in 2nd, 1.3 seconds back, and Pierre Gasly finishes on the podium for AlphaTauri, and scoring 15 very valuable points for that team. Charles Leclerc coming home in 4th after starting from the pole. Lando Norris in 5th for the McLaren. Fernando Alonso for Alpine Renault, scoring a top 10 result. Yuki Tsunoda, the other AlphaTauri. So AlphaTauri gets both of their cars in the top 10, and one of them on the podium. Both Ferraris finish in the top 10. Both McLarens finish in the top 10. So Daniel Ricciardo comes home in 9th, right behind Carlos Sainz, who recovered from his issue. And Kimi Räikkönen for Alfa Romeo gets into the points, finishing in the 10th position and scoring the final championship point. Max Verstappen ended up with the fastest lap on lap 44 with a 1:44.481, but because he did not finish in the top 10, he does not get the crucial bonus point. So, driver standings, 6 races down. Right now, 16 to go, although that number could increase to 17, like I said before. So it's status quo for the top 2. This championship table, as far as the top 2 concerned, should be switched way around. I mean, Hamilton had a major opportunity to retake the championship lead and failed to do so, blowing it with 2 laps to go. So it's Max Verstappen still on top of the points lead, point standings with 105 points. Still just a scant 4-point lead over Hamilton. Sergio Perez with his 2nd career win moves up into 3rd in the points with 69. Lando Norris is 4th in the McLaren with 66. Then you have Charles Leclerc in 5th with 52. Valtteri Bottas drops all the way to 6th in the points after being as high as 3rd. Just 47 points for him right now. And then Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly moves up to 8th with his podium. Sebastian Vettel moves up in 9th with his podium. And Daniel Ricciardo rounds out the top 10 in the 2nd McLaren. Constructor standings. Red Bull Racing now has a 26-point advantage over Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship, but still a long ways to go. And I like how in the next event graphic they put 2 Fs in Formula. There you go. But it's still going to be a battle between Red Bull and Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship. Ferrari now takes over the 3rd position from McLaren, 94 to 92. AlphaTauri moves up to 5th in the Constructors' Championship. Aston Martin moves up to 6th. They got one of their drivers each onto the podium. AlphaTauri in particular got both of their drivers in the points. Alpine Renault in 7th with 25 points. Alfa Romeo now has 2 points in the Constructors' Championship, and the 2 teams that have still yet to score points, of course, Haas and Williams. As for my final rating for the 2021 Formula One Azerbaijan Grand Prix, this was easily the best race of the year so far in Formula One. Absolutely spellbinding, and the craziness at the end of this race was just unparalleled to anything else we've seen so far this season, except maybe the end of the race at Bahrain. But I don't even think Bahrain's finish could compare to this one. This was a what the fuck kind of deal, and Pirelli's going to have some explaining to do as far as what happened today. So lots of storylines coming out of this, a lot to talk about. Nearly an hour into this video. It's the longest Formula 1 review I think I've done so far since I've been doing it. But my final rating for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, I'm going to give it an 8 on the fuel gauge. So, the highest rated Formula 1 Grand Prix so far this year. Definitely kept my interest, I'll tell you that much. A hell of a lot more than Monaco did. I mean, the difference between Monaco and this race was literally night and day. Literally night and day. This was definitely the best Formula 1 race of the year so far. It has me looking forward to the next one, which is the French Grand Prix at Circuit Paul Ricard, which I believe is in 2 weeks, I want to say. Well, the next race was supposed to be the Canadian Grand Prix, but that has been canceled. I think due to COVID concerns. So the next race is indeed the French Grand Prix, and it is indeed in 2 weeks. So the rest of the races in June, we have the French Grand Prix at Circuit Paul Ricard on June the 20th, and then we have a double whammy at the Red Bull Ring. You have the Styrian Grand Prix on June the 27th, and then on Independence Day weekend, it's the Austrian Grand Prix, both races of which, the Styrian and Austrian Grand Prix, both taking place at the Red Bull Ring. And of course, the races that were scheduled have either been postponed or canceled. There was supposed to be the Chinese Grand Prix on April the 11th, but that was postponed, and I'm pretty sure that would be canceled. The Canadian Grand Prix was scheduled for next week, but that's been canceled due to COVID, as well as the Turkish Grand Prix and the Singapore Grand Prix. Singapore Grand Prix was scheduled for October the 3rd. Obviously, that's not going to happen now. They did say that they are planning on replacing the Singapore Grand Prix with another race, but that has not been confirmed as of right now. So at the moment, it's down to 22 Grand Prix in 2021. Now, whether it stays that way or we get back to the number 23 remains to be seen. But regardless, a pretty intriguing season so far, to say the least. It's going to be Red Bull versus Mercedes all the way. Verstappen versus Hamilton for the title. So now the question is, will Verstappen be able to overhaul Hamilton? Or will Hamilton get that 8th championship? And I think the other question is, when, it's not a matter of if, it's when Hamilton reaches the magical number of 100 Formula 1 victories. He's just 2 away. When he'll get that 100th? It's anyone's guess at this point, but it's just a matter of when. But that is going to do it for a very eventful and very wild edition of The Fuel. Lots of crazy stories coming out of this one. Whew. Makes you wonder if the rest of the season is going to be like this. I doubt it, but good Lord. I mean, when F1 is kind of boring, it is boring, but when it gets crazy, it gets mental. Like, the crazy shit that can happen in Formula 1 is just absolutely insane. And we saw a big... Today, pretty much was the epitome of that. You know? And this is one of the reasons why we love motorsports, because of crazy shit like this. So, there you go. But, that's going to do it for this edition of The Fuel. Of course, I got one more coming up after the Cup race later on today. Of course, I don't think that's on until 4 o'clock. But it's at Sonoma, so it should be a relatively short race. And we'll be reviewing that later on tonight. So, thank you very much for watching this edition of The Fuel. And until next time, this is the Packer Man signing out. See you later. Thank you for watching tonight's video. Be sure to like and subscribe, you rats!